Yep, he gave me a wag of the finger,
Yeah,
didn't he?
so
No, no, no,
hold.
no. We cannot do votes today because the meeting was not posted in time. So we'll go over the votes.
It wasn't
and-
posted in time because we didn't anticipate Monday being a holiday and it didn't count, we were told.
Okay.
So,
So
sorry about
we'll,
skip all the
we'll,
votes.
We didn't.
well, we can talk about it, we can
actually
look at
did,
them, you know,
but
and see if there's
Monday
any
doesn't
discussion
count
for the votes, and then
because it's a
next
holiday.
meeting we can just vote
We
on
didn't
them.
know that it didn't count.
But it wasn't posted
We
with
won't
the adequate
vote
time.
on these things, but we can still have the meeting.
No, we're good. Give me the thumbs up. Everybody ready?
Sure.
Ready? Okay, ready? Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the school committee meeting for February 16th. May I have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, so moved. Welcome, everybody, on this rainy, windy evening. We have just two items on our agenda tonight, and we're going to start by inviting Dr. Peter Cohen and Abby LaRoe to join us here at the table, please, for the presentation on the Parcc Decision, the 8th grade Parcc Decision. Wherever,
Whatever you prefer.
whatever you prefer. If you're going to work the, okay. We can sit down there if we like, so we can see.
Yeah, we'll stand and then we'll sit after we're done. How's that? How about that Megan Trainor? Everybody.
Very nice.
Congratulations, Grammy. There you go. Okay, good evening, everybody. We are going to be presenting on the decision beginning in the summer of 2014 for the 2015 administration of Parcc, and then again in December of 2015 for the 2016 administration of Parcc. And the focus here occurs at the 8th grade level, and the question was why Parcc 8th grade math at CPS. So Peter and I are going to sort of share, and we're going to toggle back and forth, and then I believe the format is we'll present, and then at the end it will be open for questions. Is that correct, Pauline? Thank you. So in 2014 we had to make a decision. It was after the pilot year, and we did pilot a few grades here at NPS of Parcc, and we had to make a decision whether or not we were going to go Parcc or MCAS, as well as what that would look like and what format we would be taking that in. So we're just going to go through a little bit here of what our decision was. So we chose Parcc, next generation assessment, very new, digital, completely new format aligned to the standards. More rigorous, not just with format and a digital platform, but the content was more precisely aligned to the new standards that had adopted the Common Core State Standards to create the Massachusetts Mathematics Framework and ELA Framework. We chose Parcc, an assessment built on the principles of universal design for learning. This is often referred to as UDL, and essentially what that means is providing access to all children. So the digital format allowed for, and we had gone over this I think in the past, it allowed for all kids to magnify the font if they want to, play around with background lighting. The test allowed for audio, so things like that. Just making, UDL is built on making the assessment more accessible to all learners. So that's what UDL is. And we talked about the digital platform. That required us to really strengthen our infrastructure with technology in the district, as well as making sure our students and teachers were ready for that. So some practice, getting everyone ready just on clicking and pointing and dragging and all of that, which is also embedded in the technology standards in the Common Core State Standards. And then lastly, we had an option of taking what was referred to in Parcc as end of course assessments. So for example, Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, these are all high school level courses. As MCAS 1.0, our traditional MCAS remains the graduation requirement for the class of 2019. And just to point out that our last year's 8th graders are the class of 2019. So those students will be the last class to take MCAS 1.0 as their graduation requirement. And I'm going to hand it over to Peter.
So in the first year of Parcc, for our 8th graders, we had 25 students enrolled in our upper level 8th grade math class, and we opted to have them take the 8th grade math Parcc assessment. And again, last year's 8th graders, this year's freshmen, the class of 2019, it was already stated to us in advance that they would be the class that would still take MCAS in 10th grade as a graduation requirement, MCAS 1.0, not a digital platform. And so our current 8th grade Algebra 1 class, which we're going to talk about in some detail tonight, is not completely aligned to Algebra 1 standards. So what it does is it takes all of the 8th grade math standards and some Algebra 1 and puts it all together into a year-long class. Students that take the upper level math class in 8th grade do not currently receive any kind of high school credit for participation in that upper level class. So once we got through that first full year of Parcc, being a district that participated in Parcc, then we were required to stick with it again for this coming year, for 2016. And of course, we're sticking with the digital format, and it should be noted that the goal is that all districts throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts will, by 2019, will be taking digital assessments. So when they develop MCAS 2.0, that will become a digital assessment as well. Now, end of year assessment, Parcc assessments, not final exams, but end of year Parcc assessments at the high school level are already obsolete. So they were in place in 2015. They are not in place for any districts in 2016. So at this point, for this coming administration of the test this spring, the only end of course assessment that remains is the Algebra 1 class for 8th graders to take. Now, if you took it in the first year and then took it again this year, you'd have 2 years of consistent data. But we took the 8th grade test in year 1, and we want consistent data for 2 consecutive years before they change the test again. Remember that over the course of 4 years, we're going to have 3 different assessments in Massachusetts. So again, all of our 8th graders took the 8th grade math assessment in year 1, and they're all going to take the 8th grade math assessment again this year in year 2. Now, Algebra 1, as an end of course assessment, is most likely going to be obsolete next year when we transition to that new assessment, that MCAS 2.0. There will just be an 8th grade math test, just like there was just an 8th grade math test back when it was MCAS 1.0.
Thank you. And the rationale for that is based on ESSA, which is the new NCLB, holds the same standard. So with regard to standardized testing, which is, it is required that students take 1 annual assessment from in 3rd through 8th grade and 1 year in high school. So we'd still be under the requirements for that. Nowhere does it say that there needs to be end of course assessments. So here's the real sort of rationale here. I'm going to bring you back that new assessments are based on new standards. So the reason that Parcc and SBAC were even designed is because the standards changed in 2011, formal adoption in Massachusetts. And when the department adopted the new standard, they needed a new assessment, so did all of the other states. So there was a real need for a change in pathways. One of the most dramatic changes in the Massachusetts mathematics standards occurs in 8th grade. So if you look at the blue book, if you look at the mathematics standards, you really see how dramatic that change is. And there's actually a crosswalk devoted to this effort. If any of you would like to see the crosswalk of the change from the old standards to the new, it's really dramatic. And so, to that end, when this big, huge shift occurred at the secondary level in mathematics, the Massachusetts Department of Education provided some sample pathways for districts to consider when they were making this change and realignment. So I'm going to show you those 3 pathways right now. I'm sorry, it's kind of, it's probably not that clear, but So the first pathway talks about compacting at the middle school level. The second pathway talks about doubling up in the high school. And the last pathway talks about an enhanced pathway at the high school. So take that in, slightly different. The first two pathways offer what's called an acceleration point at different levels. So you can see in the compacting model, the acceleration point actually occurs at the 7th grade level. So let me just draw that out in terms of the Blue Book and standards. So 6th grade students would just take a course that was 6th grade mathematics on the 6th grade standards. Then where the acceleration occurred in 7th grade, now they would compact the curriculum and the standards to teach 7th grade mathematics standards, but also add in, sort of fold in, part of the 8th grade standards. So that real uptick in rigor, trying to integrate those standards, and then it goes further by the time the student is in 8th grade to do part of the grade 8 standards and part of Algebra 1, and then you see the transition into high school, geometry, Algebra 2, pre-calc, and then calc. Doubling up in high school would mean you take straight on 6th grade math, 7th grade math, 8th grade math, all aligned to just those grade level standards, and then the point of acceleration occurs at the high school level where they are literally doubling up courses. So now, in my freshman year, I'm doing a double dose of algebra and geometry. And this is all intended to get kids, what's the path to get them to that calculus level. So these are 3 suggested sample pathways that DESE provided for folks when the change in standards occurred. It did not say it was mandatory. We can, if we like, we can talk further about how other districts are looking at these pathways that don't exactly mimic the 3 sample ones, but because these decisions are made at the local level, several districts have different points of acceleration going all the way down to 5th grade, actually. Some districts choose to start their acceleration point at the 5th grade level. So again, these are 3 samples. Districts decide to do what they want to get kids to that level of calculus. I'll let Peter talk about the CPS.
Yep. So currently we have grade 6 math. It's split into a double dose, so kids have two math classes in 6th grade, but those are where the 6th grade math standards are taught. In 7th grade, it's a 7th grade math class for all students. It's not leveled. And it's in 8th grade that we reach that acceleration point that Abby just described. And so some of our students take just a straight grade 8 math class, and some of our students take grade 8 math plus some algebra 1. All students go on to NHS and in freshman year take geometry, and then this is a simplified version, there's sort of a bunch of different pathways, but at that point, depending on what prior experience you had and how you did in 8th grade and 9th grade, you would then have either Algebra 1 or Algebra 2, and then again, depending on what track you're on, Algebra 2 or pre-calculus, and then eventually in senior year, pre-calculus or calculus. Now again, there are tons of different variables, special education and other things that could be incorporated into this, but this is the simplified way of what we do right now. And so you can see that advance or acceleration point in 8th grade has to still teach the 8th grade standards plus some Algebra 1. It's not just a straight Algebra 1 course.
Because it's pure 7th grade standards at the 7th grade level, they cannot just leapfrog the entire 8th grade standards and then go into algebra, so there has to be that point of integration there for our acceleration point to occur, the way that we currently have it.
So you can see, and we'll talk about this in a second, why the choice to have students take the grade 8 Parcc assessment makes sense, because they are all taking grade 8 math. If they were taking just a pure Algebra 1 class, we could have had other discussions at that point, not under the scenario that we have here.
So, again, but just reiterating what Peter just said, our current mathematics pathway does not offer a point of acceleration prior to 8th grade. And that's one of the key things to remember right now, that our point of acceleration begins in 8th grade, not before. So we're needing that integration, and that's when the standards get even more and more sophisticated, as I began saying. That point in 8th grade is when the standards are the most sophisticated change from the old framework to the new. So we are not fully aligned, and the best way I can say that is when I'm taking the Algebra 1 course right now, I am not just taking a course that's giving me pure Algebra 1 standards. I need to get those critical areas in the 8th grade standards, including Pythagorean theorem, I need to get all those or I would have missed those. So that's critical to understand. So we do integrate the Algebra 1 standards into our 8th grade mathematics. So again, and to the point again, they cannot leapfrog that, which is why the Algebra 1 Parcc assessment, and I'm going to say this again, is a high school end of course assessment that yes, students had the option to take at the 8th grade level Algebra 1, to me, had they had a pure Algebra 1 course. And let's talk about some of the things we're now talking about at NPS in mathematics. So there are continuing discussions about these pathways all of the time. There are lots of brainstormed pathways, different pathways that are being discussed right now in the vertical mathematics team. We've seen them, they're still evolving, where these different acceleration points can occur and all the different types of pathways that we're in discussion about. Curriculum compacting, we're looking at where could that compacting occur, and really when do you concentrate those standards enough. And again, you could go down to a lower grade. We haven't made those decisions yet, it's still evolving, but we're certainly looking at the concept of curriculum compacting for our accelerated students. And then strengthening the required fluencies and prerequisite knowledge, which, you saw the pathways, they all began in 6th grade. Well, critical required fluencies occur pre-K to 5, and that foundation really needs to be strengthened so that we can enjoy the pathway that we want to have our kids taking. So we're really taking a look at those required fluencies. We've done some great work on that this year at the elementary school. We're really looking sharply at those. So that's all growing and evolving. So now I'd like to talk to you about the percentages of districts in the Commonwealth that took Algebra 1 last year and this year. And I am going to just, for a point of clarity, I do believe that I may have, it may have looked higher before. I was trying to isolate CBT schools, computer-based testing schools, and I was probably doing schools in that district, so I apologize if I've shared a percentage that looked a little bit higher than the 19.5 in previous exchanges. But it is not, in fact, 19.5 of districts taking Parcc chose to administer Algebra 1 in 8th grade. That is, the N there is 38 districts out of 194 in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts chose to opt for Algebra 1 in 8th grade. That was in the spring 2015. If we then fold in everyone who took MCAS, where there was no option to take Algebra 1, we're now at 38 districts out of 359 districts in the Commonwealth who took Algebra 1, which is about 10% of students opting, being able to opt into Algebra 1. For spring 2016, the decision had to be made in December. As Peter has already said, we went point to point, and for the reasons of our current course pathways, we chose to take 8th grade math again for all of our 8th graders. And now it's 30% of districts taking Parcc chose to administer Algebra 1 in 8th grade, 71 out of 235. I'll talk about that in a second. And then overall, 19.7% of districts, when you account for those students taking MCAS, 71 districts out of 360 total in the Commonwealth are providing access to Algebra 1. Now, yes, there was an increase, as you see in the spring 2016 administration. I also need to remind you that in the spring administration of Parcc, 46% of districts opted for MCAS and 54 opted for Parcc. It was almost a 50-50 split. This year, and I hope I get this right, it's 27% of districts are taking MCAS and 63% are taking Parcc. So more districts are taking Parcc, so more districts now have access. And so that we join basically, whatever one you're looking at, 80 or 70% of the districts in the Commonwealth who are choosing to take 8th grade mathematics. And as Peter said earlier, it's changed 3 times in the last 4 years. There's a lot of unknowns about what is MCAS 2.0, what does it look like, what does this hybrid approach mean. People are playing around all the time with what percentage of items are coming from Parcc, that, you know, Mitchell Chester is gonna have us, you know, still contain, you know, what does that look like? We really don't have any idea. What we do know on his vision is that it will be on a digital platform, and certainly we will be, I'm certain, borrowing items from Parcc. But one thing that was learned in the studies about Parcc was that, and we've said this before, there wasn't enough floor items, there were too many ceiling items, so the hybrid approach will hopefully scaffold that better than it has in the current Parcc assessment. And so we will certainly tell you of any new developments in assessment as soon as we hear them from DESE. We always try to, in, you know, as quick a fashion as we can. But right now there are still a lot of unknowns, basically, that haven't been decided.
Just in anticipation of one of the questions you might ask is our courses are not textbook driven. We use textbooks in all of our courses as resources. And so while a 7th grader may have a textbook that says on the cover pre-algebra, it's a grade 7 math standards book that we're covering the grade 7 math standards. It's not a pure pre-algebra class. Just like the 8th grade textbook may say algebra on the cover, but we are covering the 8th grade standards plus some algebra, not purely algebra. So please don't confuse the textbook name with what the actual course is.
And Peter's actually already said that for next year, there's course descriptions and course titles are changing as we speak, right, on the new Aspen. So.
Yep.
Okay. Can I ask the school committee to go back to the table so we can ask some questions, and could you join us at the table?
Sure.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Abby and Kisa, for that presentation. And at this point, I would like to open it up to the school committee for questions. What we will do is we're going to do a public comment for this section specifically, and then we'll go on to the second agenda item and then have public comment. But I'm going to ask, first of all, to entertain questions from the school committee. Tim?
Could you go over the basement and ceiling that you were talking about?
Sure. So what happened after Parcc was given, and I think especially the end of course assessments, if you will, and this wasn't just Massachusetts, it was the 15 states in the consortium. When they looked at those items again, in a previous presentation, I think I referred to them as Goodwill Hunting items, like Professor Lambo puts a question on the board and walks away for a week. That level of sophistication of the items was what was occurring at a level that was so pronounced that if you look at the Algebra 2 data from Parcc, you'll see that it is not, I'm sorry I don't have the percentage in my head, but it was just very, very low because the test was so upper level and intense that they didn't account for the start of those sort of floor level items. It was all ceiling. And if you look at, there's been plenty of research done already on Parcc and MCAS, and there's a new study that just came out a couple days ago that was on Parcc, MCAS, ACT. There's a new ACT test, and I'm sorry, there's one more where they talk about this very issue, that the depth of knowledge level was just, it went from like 0 to 100 really quickly. So looking at that and where they envision that the MCAS 2.0 will take that into account and do a better job of weaving in some floor level items and ceiling level items.
Okay. Melissa?
Yes. Thank you. I thought this was a very clear description of how you came to your decision. I guess I do want to make a statement that overall, I think we've seen, based on looking at both the Parcc test results, MCAS over previous years, we all understand that as a district we have challenges in mathematics. And that the math task force is working to address them. So some of my questions may be a little bit redundant or broader than just this discussion. But on page 2 or the 4th slide, we had a conversation, a bullet point that said current 8th grade Algebra 1 course is not completely aligned to Algebra 1 standards. Is that Parcc? Is that Common Core? They're talking about Common Core standards?
I wish I had it. I actually have a copy of it, but the blue book. So everybody, I did this last year and in the spring, but every course content area has its own set of standards. So
Okay.
mathematics in Massachusetts happens to be blue. So that's a book that shows you pre-K to 12 in the Commonwealth what standards are for each grade level that you teach.
Okay.
So it goes sort of very purely by grade level, pre-K to 8, and then after that, it goes sort of by conceptual design, so which would be more course specific, like Algebra 1, geometry, and so on. But so grade levels go off after
Okay.
8th grade. But so there are, I wish I had the number in my head, but let's say 30, I'm not even going to estimate a number, but like let's say 30 standards in 8th grade. But then there are an additional number of standards in Algebra 1. So when they get that acceleration point at the 8th grade level, we are now jockeying between this portion of 8th grade standards and this portion of Algebra 1 standards, and we're integrating those because in 1 year's time, it wouldn't be possible to teach both of
But-
those in 180 days.
That's the
So-
leapfrog bullet that we discussed,
Okay.
that you would have students miss out on some of those 8th grade standards if we skipped right to an Algebra 1 class.
Because they're not ostensibly getting them in 7th grade.
No, 7th is
as-
pure 7th
pure
grade
7th.
standards.
So just to sort of dumb it down a little bit further, then, our students who are in what we consider our accelerated math program, taking both Algebra 1 and 8th grade math, would not then be prepared for a
Absolutely.
state Algebra 1 assessment in comparison with the other students in those districts who are taking it.
Absolutely, a high school level Algebra 1
Okay.
assessment, and I like that you said that, Melissa. So in other districts, just to draw this out for you, and I'll give you a concrete example, in Bourne, so you'll see Bourne on the Algebra 1 list. Bourne has a class called Algebra 1 that is an Algebra 1 class that receives high school credit. You can be an 8th grader and take that class. You can be a 9th grader and take that class. The class is exactly the same regardless of the grade you are in, and it's going purely from the Algebra 1 standards.
Okay.
And in Bourne, they chose to give 8th graders high school credit for that class.
Okay. So I guess the next part of my question then is, how then do we evaluate where our students are against other students in the districts? So how can we have these test results be meaningful for us to understand how our students are prepared or not prepared to move on to high school?
Well, I think
Or to the next level in high school, I
there's
mean.
different assessments other than just Parcc. So there's MAP, there's all kinds of different assessments. But right now we can compare, there's comparability with our students taking an 8th grade math assessment to other districts taking an 8th grade math assessment. And we are not the only district, clearly, of the 80% who gave the 8th grade math assessment who might have a little bit of integration of
Okay.
the Algebra 1
Okay.
standards going on as well.
And so,
But the sort of like snarky answer is, how do you compare? Well, very carefully. Like
Yeah.
You don't want to make broad statements because you got to look at what each district did, what their pathway is. So you need to be careful to not just make comparisons to a district that did have their kids take the Algebra 1 test.
Gotcha.
Because they may have an acceleration point in 5th grade. that
Okay.
some districts do.
Martha's Vineyard has an acceleration point in 5th grade.
Okay.
We have another one, depending on, they have 4, as you know.
and
4
those are things that
schools.
we're considering as part of the overall curriculum
Absolutely.
assessment of math. Because I guess the next question is then, by which tools do we evaluate the rigor of what we're teaching? You know, I think that sort of seems to be at the essence of the question. If you've got students who are capable and willing and want to be pushed academically, our quote-unquote best and brightest, how are we then evaluating our ability to push them forward?
So I think it's dependent upon, once the decision is made about where our acceleration point will lie, because if we said, for example, 7th grade or 8th grade, then there's a battery of assessments out there that would test for like an algebra prognosis test. So the Orleans Hannah is one of those. There are others. There's GMAID. There's lots of those. If you wanted to create an assessment for an acceleration point at a younger level, you would look at a different instrument. And there are those as well. There's one that Stanford puts out. So I think it depends on to your point, Melissa, once we decide what the acceleration point is, are we assessing the students based on their ability, and does it show that the students have readiness, have hit mastery and above mastery of the current standards that they're faced with, to demonstrate that they could in fact be in an accelerated route. So I think the assessment would almost depend on where we're going to put our point of acceleration, or we could be doing, and again, no one likes all this testing, but we could be sort of doing some more formative testing along the way. One recent assessment that we've just obtained, and I think we're ahead of the Commonwealth, is that there's something called Parcc Diagnostics that Nantucket signed up for actually before Mitchell Chester just came out with it this week. And those are short. They're 20 to 30-minute tests that we are not requiring of our teachers, but certainly are giving our teachers access to. So if they wanted to do a quick Parcc diagnostic on a certain grade level, maybe even a grade level up, they could use those. So there's a variety of metrics that we could be looking at to determine, you know, mastery or readiness for the next level. And we, again, these are all conversations that are happening right now.
So, and then just to be clear, Peter, in 6th grade, the double dose of math is not, in fact, an acceleration determination. It's to make sure that those students are acquiring and have mastery of standards, both from coming in from elementary school and shoring up what they need to be successful going into 7th grade, but it's not acceleration.
Correct. So in grade 6, you've got the grade 6 standards that we want all kids to be able to master by the end of grade 6. We've taken them and put them into 2 classes so that we can go in more depth and at a pace that ensures that they get that solid foundation before going on to 7th and 8th grade.
Okay.
It's almost the opposite of the 8th grade upper level class, which is taking the 8th grade standards and some Algebra 1 standards all into one class. It's a rapid pace. So if you talk to students in 6th grade who you might think would complain about 2 math classes, certainly don't complain about 2 math classes. Part of that is the quality of the teaching. And then in 8th grade, if you talk to those upper level kids, they will tell you they're being pushed, like their pace is rapid in that class.
Yeah, my son's one of them.
And I think in 6th grade, though, even though they might not feel the pace, one of the areas that all the math teachers, we actually convened all of the math teachers in the district last spring, and they all came up with this really strong point about kids need the required fluencies. So making sure that in 6th grade that they're really filling in those, when I say required fluencies, I mean, you know, multiplication, division, and quick retrieval of that, so that the foundation is laid, that when you go into an upper level course in secondary, you have that foundation. Also, there's a lot of depth in 6th grade. I did an observation about a month or 2 ago and saw a story about, I forget the title, someone's integer dilemma or something, and it was a narrative about where the kids really went into depth about their conceptual understanding, and it was great, and that was in Dee Avery's class.
Now, in anticipation of either your follow-up questions or from the audience, you know, 6th grade having a double dose, last year was the first year that we did that, with 2 teachers coming in and navigating for us how to split up the standards between the 2 of them, both of them in their first year teaching 6th grade, and then being assessed on a Parcc assessment. That was the first year of the Parcc assessment. And so our 6th grade math scores were not as high as our 7th and 8th grade math scores. It does not spark me to want to throw away this double dose theory until we have got more time to be able to see if this can work, because we do believe that slowing it down and building that foundation as the teachers are you know, developing their abilities and improving their instruction, and we are more prepared for the assessment, we were likely to see those scores increase. Maybe not immediately in 6th grade, but certainly in 7th and 8th, we're going to see the dividends of that if we let it play out.
And having that flexibility actually allows for opportunities for enhancement and enrichment because of the double class. So when that starts building up, there's more of an opportunity to maybe enhance in those 2 classes than just do the double dose.
Thank you. Jen?
I don't think I have any specific questions. I feel like I was thinking more along the broad lines like Melissa was on how you determine the double class for 8th grade, taking the regular 8th grade curriculum math with the algebra. How you determine that class if you're focusing more on your gifted, you know, math students, and if that's sort of how you're assigning them. And if you do think you will potentially have these smaller sections to accommodate these students who are ready for that next step, that rigor.
Currently, there's a few things that happened, a few admissions criteria, I guess, if you will, for that. There's a skills test that is given that comes out of their current textbook. Kathy Benson showed it to me today. They look at also map data for mathematics. They look at the summative data from whatever summative the kids are taking at the previous year, Parcc or MCAS, and then teacher recommendations and so on. So there's a lot of data points that go into making those decisions for those kids to be able to take that accelerated pathway.
Kate?
I don't have any specific questions. I thought this was a wonderful presentation, so thank you.
Mike?
I'm just going to answer, I think what I heard is the second part to Jen's question, and that is not only how do we determine it for this, but how do we accommodate those students who are truly ready to go on.
At the lower grades.
Right. And I think, you know, we had a vertical meeting with 6th through 12th grade math teachers a couple of weeks ago. And they have recommended a pathway or two that the middle school can consider to make our 8th grade algebra a truly standalone algebra class. And actually, Alice Crowley was one of the people that came up with the idea. And I don't want to talk too far about that idea because we're just talking about it. But we do, and the math committee does recommend that we need to be able to hit more acceleration points. So, and we want to develop an Algebra 1 class in the 8th grade that they get high school credit for. That's the goal of this group. And I believe that there are ways, and Peter's, you know, exploring these. He wasn't part of that meeting, but we're looking at that, and I think that's what we need to do. I would say that we also need to accelerate in 7th grade at some point with maybe a true pre-algebra group. We don't have those right now, but we need to. And I think, you know, maybe there's a way, and scheduling is always a challenge, but maybe there's a way in the double dose in the 6th grade that you can accommodate for an accelerated group in math at 6th grade as well. To truly be able to accelerate at the high school level, we have to do a better job of accelerating in the middle school and also at the elementary school. We're not doing that well enough, and that's why we don't have a true 8th grade algebra class now.
Just to be clear, we are exploring tons of options. So you heard a lot from the superintendent right there, and I don't want you to think
That makes Peter nervous.
2016, 2017, all of a sudden, all of those things are going to be put in place. They will be phased in at an appropriate pace so that we do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Other considerations
Does
are,
make me a little-
is it instead of or in addition to?
Right.
So is there a track in 5th grade that is, you take 5th grade math and I take this other thing, or we both take 5th grade math and then in addition to, I take something else? So there's those questions as well.
And keep in mind, like, just keeping the global picture of a schedule in place, is there will be choice points. And so students and parents are going to have to choose, and something has to give. You can't just add another course on top of all of the other courses that kids take. So, you know, it's possible that the impact will be on something like chorus or band or art. And so there will be a choice point for students to make if they want to accelerate. We're not gonna prevent them from doing it. It's just they won't be able to take the entire course catalog if they make that.
If there's horizontal enhancement, but if there were vertical, that instead of, it wouldn't prevent the unified art.
Although I'm confident that many kids, if given the option of actually getting a high school credit in 8th grade, would make that choice because they can pick up the elective in high school then,
Francis,
or an extra
Francis.
math.
Francis had
And
a,
it's not new to
Right.
the Nantucket Public Schools, because we had that option in middle school of taking Algebra 1.
That's
for
how I
high
got to
school credit.
calculus, I think. I feel like that's how.
Right. That prevents you from doubling up
But I had nothing but
in
study
that
halls.
middle pathway.
I mean, I had no free periods. To Peter's point, I had no
Electives, yeah.
electives. My only options were study hall. I'm sorry, Francis.
Francis.
Yeah, I also, this is more just a clarification, but is the ultimate goal at this point to try through the acceleration programs to get as many students as possible to the calculus level, ultimately, is what the goal is?
I think I might, and I don't want to speak for the high school math department, to take more math. I'm not sure whether the ultimate goal is for every child to take calculus, but I think the idea of them taking more math, because they may choose stats instead of calculus. And another thing that we're investigating, and guess I'll play this card too, is making the financial literacy or personal literacy course not just elective but required of all graduates. And you've heard me talk about that before. So all of those things are in motion, but understandably the principals get a little bit nervous when I commit them to a path sometimes.
And then going from that, what happens if, because I know this happened to my younger sister, if you in that, I might have changed since I was in 7th grade, but you took that like mini test kind of thing that kind of gave the, you can go to algebra or you're going to take the other class. But what happens if in any point before 8th grade, something happens and your development isn't quite at the speed it could be, and you do get put behind some of the other students when technically not always, you start to fall behind when you really had the opportunity and you could have. Is there any way to like bounce back from that? Like, I know if you didn't take algebra 1 8th grade, is there a way you can, without taking it, go?
There's still opportunities at the high school, particularly sophomore year, where a student would be able to double up in math.
The
fit
second
it
pathway.
into their schedule, and then get kind of back on the track that we're talking about.
Okay, so you'd ultimately have to take 2 math classes at some point if that happened. Okay.
Tim, you had a question.
But to be ready to take algebra is more physiologic than anything else. I mean, some kids are ready, maybe they got more myelin and more gray matter at an earlier age, and some kids that comes up later. So I mean, Francis, that bothered me a little bit to say, kids are being put behind, because I think, there are certain elements of it that I don't think are based, some kids mature and are ready for it, and some kids aren't at that point. I mean, is that?
Sure, that's a challenge with standards in literacy too, is that kids are at different paces and ability levels, but we move them forward based on age.
But algebra has always seemed to me to be a defining point that some kids are ready for it, and for mystical reasons other kids aren't. And it's probably,
Yeah, that's the other reason why we try to have multiple indicators of whether or not they're ready, as opposed to just choice.
And I think to that end, Tim, finding the appropriate metric that's going to be able to give us as best accurate data to do that is worth exploring. So the assessment to show that I have readiness to get into Algebra 1 is going to be critical for us to.
And I think I would maybe push back just a little bit. While there is an intellectual piece that you refer to, I think there also is an experiential piece, and we have to give students opportunities and push them, and then if they're not ready, I would agree with you, they need a different path, and so the middle path up here may be appropriate for some children, but it's still incumbent upon us to push them so that this can become a true algebra class and not a combination integrated math and algebra.
And can I just comment as well? I feel like they are making an effort at NES as well. My son, who's in 4th grade, meets with Miss Basket, and he's so excited to be doing some 5th grade math at 4th grade, in a 4th grade.
Right.
He's in 4th grade, but he's being pulled out to do some 5th grade math, and it's very motivating and exciting for him, and it's keeping him interested. And
It's
I
exposure.
appreciate the effort that is starting at, the lower level.
I think, if we know that if we can have acceleration points in 4th and 5th and 6th grade, there won't be a need for double dosing in the future or even in the high school. That's where we would love to get, but we're not there right now. But I'm glad that you referenced that because there are efforts to that end.
It's actually easier to compact the curriculum when the standards are less sophisticated. It's easier to do. If you look at Joseph Rinzoli's work, that's the point, the magic point, because then it's more difficult to do, obviously, when the standards become more sophisticated, because now you're compacting 2 series of very sophisticated standards. So the sort of acceleration point down, as you said, the exposure piece is critical because it makes it an easier path as you move up.
I think one of the areas to sort of, as you look forward and plan this and to have a full algebra class, because I have to say, I was not aware, I guess I was under the assumption that the class we were teaching in 8th grade, if they were in Algebra 1, was a full Algebra 1 class. And as you referenced before, I know in the past we have done that, and I know one of the concerns for parents and students was that we were limited to 1 class. So there was, I think it was MCAS, it was testing, it was assessments and teacher recommendations. And I know that it caused angst with some parents who felt like their children deserved or qualified to be in the Algebra 1 class who didn't. And in the past, sometimes they were told because of class size or they didn't have the right MCAS. So I'm just cautioning you that that's something that when you build this and offer this to possibly get a high school credit in 8th grade, which I commend you on, that with that comes some challenges, or at least just to make sure that you can accommodate, if there's 50 students that qualify, can you accommodate in the number of classes and for that teacher's time? So I had a couple of questions just on the presentation, just for clarification, and I know you said there were multiple varieties here, but going back to the sample 3-course sequence, you had the compacting in middle school, grade 6 and then grade 7 and part of grade 8. And then the question I had is the part of grade 8 in Algebra 1. Is that full Algebra 1 or is it is? So the 2 classes would potentially, that's what you mean in this slide, right?
That's an integration block still, I think, is the acceleration point, but then you could do,
It's because the acceleration point is earlier.
Yeah.
So you in 7th grade
Because
now are
7th
taking
has
off
become
some of those
7th and 8th,
standards,
right.
So you're able to cover, you have less of the 8th grade standards to cover when you get to 8th grade, and you can then do the
Full algebra, right, because I didn't see it in the high school portion. And then down on the second one, you say the current MPS course, maybe again, because you said there was a variety, you have Algebra 1 or Algebra 2, but we have Algebra 1, Part 1 and Part 2.
Right, so.
Right, I think for the diagram purposes, I tried to simplify it, sorry.
That's
Yeah,
what I
it's
thought.
okay.
So those students could, for now, coming out of 8th grade with a partial Algebra 1, could potentially, the choices could, they may end up having to retake Part 1 of Algebra 1 as a high school. They may be able to take Part 2, Algebra Part 2, in their second year.
Yep, there's lots of variations.
There's options,
Yep,
right,
they
so,
could decide
right,
when to take geometry and,
right,
but for the most part, just about every 9th grader takes geometry.
right.
And then currently there are Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Algebra 1 Part 1, Algebra 1 Part 2 classes, and so we're looking to try to consolidate that.
Right.
We'd
I
like
The,
understand
the
that.
math committee has recommended that if we do the acceleration points earlier, there would be no need for a part one and a part two.
Right.
And so that is where we hope to head.
It's,
Right.
no, it's, I think it's an interesting discussion because if
Yeah.
an algebra course, you know, as we currently have, it has a part 1 and part 2 at the high school level, you can see like how much is in the standards for algebra 1. It's a lot, and so
Mhm.
that's why we have to look at this as a whole district, not just zeroing in on the 8th grade Parcc test. That's one decision point, but this is a much bigger discussion about making sure that our kids, starting very early, get those foundational skills so that they can go up and be on the track that we want them to be on. And whether or not they all get to calculus or not, again, that would be nice, but it's more about just opening doors for them and having them have those foundational math skills from an early age on, and that we catch them when they start to struggle, we intervene, we get them back on track, and we move forward. So the math task force had a lot of positive outcomes, and they're in progress, and we're monitoring them, and we continue to monitor them, and we're having some great discussions now with the 6 through 12 subset of the task force that's talking about where are acceleration points, what do the courses look like. It's all good, it's just not focused on this one choice point, which quite candidly was an easy decision for us based on what what we presented earlier.
And not to leave NES out of the mix, they're working really hard on the required fluencies and looking at a lot of ways to strengthen mathematics down there to sort of, if we extended that line, if you saw 5th and 4th and 3rd, you'd see all of the strengthening that was occurring that way too. So I don't wanna leave, they're off the chart literally, but they're not out of our vision.
And throughout these grades, through NES, CPS, and high school, all of the opportunities for students who are struggling in math also have the opportunity to have additional math time or instruction. I know in CPS you've talked about that, right? So can you just tell
Yeah,
us a
so
little
we've
bit about the
we've
intervention?
got math interventionists next year. We'll also have the literacy interventionists, but with the math interventionists, that'll be an opportunity for kids to that are identified as struggling to get some additional math time. In effect, a double dose.
A double dose, and that could happen 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the same for NES.
So we just put that in place this year. We just hired our math interventionist for this year. And so she is largely focused on students in 2nd and 3rd grade. But there is 75 minutes of math instruction at the elementary school in every classroom, broken down into standards teaching and then into small group teaching. So that's where kids are getting some of that additional support when they're not, when they're struggling.
Keep in mind also that the interventionist is a math specialist, so they're able to not only help us out by meeting those kids that are struggling, but we're also having the math specialist teach an extension course too. So there'll be other opportunities outside of a full-blown Algebra 1 class. In 8th grade, there'll be like a 6th grade extension course, and so there's going to be opportunities not just with that math interventionist, but potentially a technology specialist can teach an accelerated class of coding or robotics, and so we're looking at ways that we can start putting in place some courses in our encore rotation, 2-day courses, 4-day courses that allow kids that have a strength to pursue that and be challenged.
Right.
It increases general STEM opportunities.
Great. And in high school, is there, John, is, in high school, do you have the math interventions as well in place? You do not, okay.
No, but they, through grouping, they have the ability to address things a little bit easier, quite a bit easier. Because you can have some small groups for some of your neediest students. And, you have honors and CP and advanced placement.
And ideally, we'll get to a point where it really shouldn't be necessary for them to have an interventionist at the high school, because we will have caught the issues earlier. Some of that's compounded a little bit because we have so many kids that seem to be coming in January, and
Right.
that's a separate conversation. But ideally, a kid coming through the Nantucket Public Schools, we're intervening in a timely fashion that by the time they get to high school, there really shouldn't be interventions that like we're describing necessary.
Right. Thank you. Melissa?
Just one last question. Thank you. I was also going to talk about our kids who are on the lower end of the spectrum, so thanks for asking that question. But I think, Abby, in your data on comparison in districts, you were comparing us with districts who did the computer-based test. Did you say that CBT?
Oh, no,
Okay.
the data in the report
Yep.
that you have there is
Yep.
just straight up.
Straight up. So whether
districts who
you did
took
it by
Parcc.
pencil and paper,
Yes.
or whether you did by
I think
computer.
I gave maybe a previous percentage that was, I was trying to isolate the CBT or isolate
Okay, I
schools.
just
So
got a little
I'm just
confused with
stating
that.
that for the fact that if I gave you a different percentile point previously, it was because it was a different N.
I
But
see.
that is in fact, and I even have the grid I can share with you, from the State Department.
No,
that
that's fine.
shows
I just had
it's
a note
meant to
on
act-
clarifying.
That is an
Thank you.
interesting variable when we come back and talk about Parcc results next year. Like, it is interesting for kids to take a math assessment online.
It's different.
It's very difficult. I know that my kids
Mhm.
said that it's very difficult, and I guess my follow-up question to that is, in part of the assessments that we're doing and the teaching that we're doing to the standards, and now that we're one-to-one, and do we feel like our students, and this may be a little bit hypothetical, but are we feeling like they're more prepared to take a math assessment using a computer? I know my son said that it was really challenging.
More than last year.
Yeah.
And it's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
And the more exposure they have, the better. The Parcc Diagnostics that Abby mentioned
Mm-hmm.
will be an additional tool.
Mhm.
Kids have the map test, but the map tests are multiple choice.
Multiple
in math,
choice,
so
they're not-
So it's
right.
different than taking that test.
Mhm.
So I think going one-to-one certainly is going to help us in that area. But that's still a work in progress too.
There was an article-
Interestingly, Ed Week that just came
Just-
out
just
today, one of the headline pieces was that kids who took those assessments digitally scored
Lower.
lower than students who did the paper and pencil.
Gotcha.
That just came out today, and so that could be. I think you can ask questions about why that is. We wanted actually and asked the department if we could split and do the elementary school in paper and pencil the first year that we did Parcc, and the middle school with computer, and they said no.
You had to go 100%.
So we had to go 100%, and I think that was a little bit nerve-wracking, more so maybe for the elementary school, because they hadn't integrated the use of the technology to the degree that the middle school already had.
Math is just difficult
So-
to do without a pencil also.
Well, they
I mean, not
do
difficult,
allow
but
for
it's
scrap paper
yeah,
when you're taking
it's just
it
a different
online.
way of
They allow for you to have
doing it, so it's not impossible, but you have to
It's
learn how to
interesting.
do
Yeah,
it,
but-
right.
I mean, hindsight's 20/20, and admittedly, I'm editorializing here and showing my cards a little bit. It just would have been nice if we're talking about so many different variables in this discussion, if they had said, we're gonna have you take these tests, we're gonna give you the data, we're not gonna release it to the public because there's too many, you can't connect the dots, and people wanna just
Right.
connect the dots and compare school to school. You can't do that very well, unless you spend like literally hours, and even then, like, there's no two schools that are exactly the same. The computer-based added a new variable. It would have been nice if they said, we're gonna take 3 years, we're gonna give you the data, we're gonna give you as much information as we can, and we're gonna perfect this test before making it so high stakes.
Because you can't tell which mechanism of
Which
improvement is
variable
working.
Right, which
Right.
variable
Right.
is the problem? Is
Right.
it the computer-based? Is it
Or
the-
which one's working.
you know, yeah.
Right.
Right, so.
Right, either way.
And I would take that a step further and say, they keep changing the game on us, and it's very frustrating. And I'm disappointed that they're going away from Parcc. I don't think everybody shares that view, but I consider Parcc a very rigorous and challenging assessment, and I wish they would stay with it so that we had that trend data over several years. But that's gone as we move to MCAS 2.0, and when we move to that, I hope we stay with that, because
At least for a time certain, so that we
Right.
can evaluate the effectiveness
Right.
of
Right.
the results. I
Yep.
think I share your frustration, not necessarily because of the quality of the test itself, but because we don't have enough information before we make a decision to change or before the state makes a decision to change, and
Right.
that hamstrings districts.
Most of us
Right.
remember MCAS 1.0, and it took a number of years before that test was really reliable. Like they kept testing the test, testing test items and structures, and there was a history test, and then there wasn't a history test. I mean, there's so many things that go into this.
Right.
It's gonna take years with MCAS 2.0 as well for it to be in a place where we're feeling like we fully grasp the data and how it's
Right.
gonna be used to inform our instruction.
But there may be retention of Parcc items in MCAS 2.0.
Right,
I think
Right.
that's the
absolutely.
thing
Right.
to remember, that it's not gonna be entirely new, that it'll feel somewhat, familiar to students, and the fact that, Chester is 100% retaining the digital platform.
Yeah.
And he wants everybody digital by 2019, so we'll see how that
Right.
goes.
Great, thank you. You had one more thing?
I just wanted to say that to Peter's last point, I think that's I think that needs a double underline, that, and I feel that I am one of those parents that feels like there is a lot of time spent on testing and assessments, and this is one very small percentage of what our administrators use to evaluate our coursework, our programs, and if we're meeting our goals. So that data that's already difficult to track is one point of many with which you're using to make those decisions. And I just want to underscore that, because it's taken me a lot of time to understand that, and even still I don't understand fully what all of those tools are. But this is one piece, and it's not that it's not important, it's just that it's one piece. So thank you.
All right, thank you. It was a good discussion. I'm going to open up now, with the permission of the school committee, to open up for public comment just on this subject, if there's any comments. Mr. Dixon.
Just a couple of observations about history and then some observations about the present and going forward. On the history, just for the record, I've always enthusiastically, and still do, endorse double dose. I was concerned that there appeared, and I think justifiably, that there appeared to be some major regression in our relative performance last year among the sixth graders who got double dose compared to the way they handled it in the fifth grade. The other thing is, historically speaking, I remember last year talking on numerous occasions in numerous forums about whether or not we were going to be able to take that grade 8 algebra exam. And the party line repeatedly was that, no, we could only take one exam. We can't take 2 exams. And that party line was even repeated as recently as at the January school committee meeting, where we couldn't separate our students. And also, I've been to an awful lot of coffees, an awful lot of forums, have had a lot of private discussions, and I had the same view that Pauline had in terms of whether or not our 8th grade Algebra 1 exam was a standalone algebra course. And there was no doubt in my mind that that was presented as a legitimate 9th grade Algebra 1 course for the 3 years I've been attending coffees, curriculum and assessment coffees, middle school coffees, superintendent's coffees, private conversation. So I was somewhat shocked to learn that isn't the case at all. And now this is what's disconcerting right now upon learning that. And that's that, those students who are taking the accelerated algebra course, basically what you're telling them, if I understood it right now, they're really getting nailed, because even though they start out in 8th grade based upon their performance on a map test to get them in this accelerated algebra course, they start out advanced relative to the other 8th graders, but because they are now taking so much 8th grade math, according to the way you're explaining it now, there's no way they're getting a full Algebra 1 course, and yet they go to geometry freshman year and then right to Algebra 2 sophomore year after this utterly, what you describe as an inadequate preparation in Algebra 1 in 8th grade. And these are supposedly the
best students based upon the MAP testing and MCAS testing, and they're not, it doesn't seem to be that they're being well served if they're on their way to being the calculus taking students. And then finally, there doesn't seem to be now any math gifted and talented programs at all in the middle school, compared to the dozens and dozens of public schools across the state that apparently are giving this full-year Algebra 1 course. They are addressing some needs of gifted and talented, but to the extent that we have a gifted and talented group, we're shortchanging them because they're not getting the full benefit of a real Algebra 1 course.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon, for your comments.
I'll speak to the one, and I apologize, David, if I did misspeak last time and say we only knew it was, we actually always knew it was optional. I just want to say that for the record. Mr. Kozart had to check the box in 2014. We had to do it again this year. The first year it only affected, let's say, 25 kids, but we knew then that our algebra course wasn't in line to the Algebra 1 pure standards. I do have, and I can share with you, just to be on the record at a parent coffee in this very room, I have a slide that says the district decision was for all students to take algebra, 8th grade math. So I have,
Thank you.
I have that. So we did say that. We did know it was an option, though. It was not a requirement, but we had a conversation as a team and decided that we knew our 8th grade algebra course wasn't completely aligned. I will say, and I will share with you, David, that there is a crosswalk that shows the impact in the change of the standards. So what's currently taught in 8th grade, if you look at the crosswalk, used to be under 10th grade. And this is not Algebra 1, this is 8th grade math standards under the new document, was formerly taught at the 10th grade level under Algebra 1. So that's just the advance in the rigor for 8th grade mathematics standards in general, and then going up from there in Algebra 1. So we are, again, trying to realign our 8th grade and our Algebra 1 course, and it's not purely Algebra 1 right now, but are we trying to get there? Absolutely. I don't know if Peter wants to talk about the double dose at 6th.
Yep, just briefly, I think we ought to be very careful about calling it a regression. What you're doing is you're looking at that group of 6th graders that are currently in 7th grade. So when they were in 6th grade, they had a double dose and they took Parcc for the first time. You're comparing that to how they performed on MCAS in 5th grade. And I think that's a very difficult pathway to take, to say that because they did these kind of scores on MCAS in 5th grade, and then how they did in 6th grade is somehow a regression. Were the scores great in 6th grade? No, we've talked about that. They're not. Although I don't think that, I think it's a leap to say that it's a regression because of the change. We changed the rules of the game. It's an online test. It's a different test. It's a more rigorous test. So I just think that it's tough to make that case that students regress.
To be fair to me, I was comparing the relative regression compared to other students in the state. They did much better as 5th graders compared to other
Yes,
5th graders in the state
You're right. And
than they did in the
that's
6th
right.
grade compared to other students in the state.
That's the area of concern.
And yet, that's where the regression was, and that's where my concern was always stated.
Mm-hmm. And I think the last 2 points, one thing that you brought up about testing in to the Algebra 1 course, MAP, MCAS, we're also looking at a really more sort of fine-tuned algebra prognosis test, David. So there's one called the Orleans-Hanna, there's a Stanford test. I think getting to that real level of mastery is something we continue to talk about to make sure that that admissions criteria is sound and really getting those talented and gifted. And I do want to say something about talented and gifted. I taught TAG for years, and I think that I absolutely agree with you that there are students who need that level of acceleration, and we are working at it. So really, really, please believe that we're trying to do that. But I think people need to remember that true TAG, if we're putting a definition on it, is a very low percentile. It's not half of our current, it's generally not half of a grade level. So, I mean, I'm totally dedicated to that effort, and I hear you, and I think we are, you know, going to be working on that at whatever level, at whatever point of acceleration,
Okay.
we begin that process. So, thank you. for
Thank
that.
you, Abby. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Peter, very much for this presentation. Okay, moving on, we have asked the school committee to take a look at the school committee self-evaluation. This was something that we actually still only have 4 out of the 5 of us to complete. So I'd like to ask the committee what they would like to do. I would like to have a sort of a discussion on Kate has been out for a couple of meetings and so hasn't had the opportunity to fill this in, and I do think it's valuable to get Kate's feedback. So I would like to actually postpone the discussion on the school committee evaluation until Kate has had an opportunity to fill her portion out. And then we could bring it back. And I was just looking on the calendar to see when we could do that.
We'll do it at the next meeting.
We could do it in the next meeting?
Sure.
Okay. Would that be all right with the committee? Okay, thank you. Otherwise, it's like assessing a 3-legged
100%.
stool.
100%.
So, okay, so we'll move on to that.
I'll have to mix the numbers so we don't
Yeah, I was gonna
all know
say.
that number 5 is
It's
Kate.
Kate.
So.
Yeah.
Mix that up, would you?
So now we've moved on to that. We'll take comments from the public on other items. Seeing none. Due to Monday being a holiday, we posted our meeting and didn't realize that the holiday would not count for a day to add into our required days of posting the meeting. So we cannot take votes at this meeting tonight. But what I would like to do is just go through them and see if the committee has any comments or discussion. The first one is to amend the rules and procedures of policy JJF, student activity revolving accounts. Mike, would you like to
Yeah,
talk to that?
I'll speak to it on page 3. You'll see the only change in that document, which raises the limit at the high school for the checking account from $10,000 to $15,000. That's been a challenge for them because the high school activity accounts are dealing with far greater amounts. And so we checked with the auditor, and he said that's fine, you can do that if your school committee would like to increase it. And we've, I'd just like to say that Martin's working hard to pull all of the loose ends there together and doing a nice job with that,
Right.
despite the fact that he's an Arsenal fan.
Well, it's probably he's able to do that because he's an Arsenal fan, but we won't get onto that. Okay, thank you. I think that's
Yeah, that's the
all right.
only change there.
Great. And then we have a gift donation from Cape Cod 5 that went to Mike Gervin's vocational woodshop program. It was a mini grant that I am guessing Mr. Gervin applied for $400, so that's wonderful. And then we have a gift donation from Egan Maritime Institute, 32 copies of the book, The Nantucket Reader, for their Nantucket history class. And then we have the Spanish class and Diversity Club are heading to New York. And I think they need chaperones, don't they?
I hope so.
Yeah. And so that's coming up May 19th and through the 22nd. So, and if anybody has any questions on that, or if we need to get any new information.
No.
No, okay. And then we have the transfers and invoices.
Can that wait?
Can
We'll
that
have to.
wait? Yes, yeah, it has to. And then we've got the meeting, which we've all had a chance to take a look at the minutes. So that's it. Mike, would you like to move on to your superintendent's report?
Sure. A lot is happening on the building project. I think all you have to do is drive by and look in, and it is astonishing how quickly Brate Builders is moving over there.
Looks completely different.
It's pretty amazing. We have a groundbreaking tomorrow at 1 o'clock, weather providing, and I after the rain this evening, as you were coming in, I don't know if the whole project is underwater. But we're hoping to do that. We have some fun things planned. We have the hard hats and the shovels and
good.
some hard hats for kids and some chocolate shovels for some of the third graders and
school committee
so
members.
I don't know if the school committee members will rate that, but and the kids that will be involved will be the third graders because they will be the fifth graders and the oldest kids in that building when it opens. But the project is moving quickly. We are even now looking at doing the entrance and the parking near the entrance this summer instead of the summer of 17. Some things have to fall right for us to be able to do that, but that would be a huge help to open the school year with that parking lot and the new entrance in
Yeah.
September. People are going to, be, I don't know what the word is. It's going to be a challenge in the month of May and June this year. It's going to be a real challenge. People think it's already been a challenge, but when the crane that is going to move steel comes and goes up in what's left of the parking area, it's going to be even more challenging. But to know that it is 2 months or maybe into April, and that in September we have, those two parking lots, I think we can see that the end is in sight. And I think that people seeing the project, it's a little easier to get excited about it and see that, what's going to happen and how it's going to benefit everybody. So I'm really excited. Diane's been working very hard with the OPM and with the architects and now Brate Builders.
May I ask Mike, is there, and I can't recall, are there copies of the plans and or the schematics in the front offices of the different schools?
There are,
Okay.
and we have them, some of them online. I'm not sure if all of them, but I'm pretty sure that the interior of the middle school renovation is online. The interior of the new intermediate school is online. I'm not sure, though, that we put the interior of the existing elementary school online. Kim, it might be there?
It was there from last
Okay.
year.
And then the pictures and the, I think there's quite a bit on there that people can see.
Excellent.
So it's an exciting time.
Great. I was just thinking of making sure the community knew how they could access what's
Mhm.
happening and what it looks like.
I would say, too, that Kim has done a great job getting information out there to the parents and keeping them apprised of the changes, which is not easy because from week to week,
Something
and
different.
sometimes even, as she said today, from day to day, she gets thrown a curve. And so, she's done a really good job with that, so.
Excellent.
Can I ask, what is the plan going to be in May when parents can't access the existing parking lot? Are we?
We are talking, I had a conversation today with the president of the ice rink to examine that, which quite honestly, parents have already started to do. And we need to probably, help out in ways for the ice rink. It is going to be inconvenient. I worry in particular about any night events. For example, we had kindergarten registration that was challenging, and we had something else recently, Kim.
We've moved the Friends Dance to a different location that happens in the springtime.
Right. Literacy night is coming,
Literacy night is
and
gonna be a challenge.
that's gonna be a challenge, and we're gonna try to maybe get staff to park such that parents can park in the new parking lot. But certain events for 10 weeks are going to be a challenge.
Oh, and I see it now every day, even using the ice rink
Yep.
parking lot, how congested it is. And what about possibly asking the Muse if we can have, I don't know, it's not very safe to have parents and children crossing the road there at that point, I don't think, but.
Right. I'm smiling because
Well, I feel like we
I
need to offer parents, a solution for.
I think at least
parking.
one teacher that I know of has already parked there at least once, and whether they're continuing. It's something I could talk to them about behind there. It is, I was smiling to hear, and I'm sure Dr. Lepre will smile too, that several parents said, I'm just sending my child on the bus. We encourage that reaction rather than deal with the, it's a challenge is a nice word, compared to some that I've heard.
Mike, will we be sending an update on that particular pinch point to the paper? Because I think it's helpful for the public to know to pick a different route if they can.
Yeah, I think.
Seek alternate route.
I think we had Nicole over to take some pictures, and I know Diane walked out there with her. And I think, in a community, people figure it out. And I think that's what's happening. Some people are saying, okay, I'm not going there again. I'm going to go through the parking lot, the new parking lot, drop my child, and keep going. When in May or June, we can get a binder coat on the new parking lot and maybe open up the cross-campus drive. I mean, there are a lot of things that can help relieve the pressure, but I have to be honest with people and say there are going to be 10 weeks of discomfort for this.
My point is just to make sure that
Yeah.
there's something in the I&M under business brief or something that.
Yeah.
Those big yellow things.
Yes.
The big yellow
Seek
things.
alternate route.
So I think people are figuring it out and working around it. And they came in one morning, Kim, into the auditorium for the little kindergarten sing-along. And I heard from the ice rink that morning because there were a lot of parents, all of the kindergarten parents.
Sing along,
Yeah. And so that was something I heard from politely, and we're working together. I met with Devin Remick today, and he was great. So.
Great, thank you.
The other thing on the horizon, we're in pretty good shape. I'm going to move that self-evaluation down to the March meeting now. We'll hope to have the Friends of Nantucket Public Schools at the first March meeting. And I think that date is good for you, Nancy, on the Student Support Services, the first March meeting. John Buckey will provide the dropout rate report. And then somewhere in March, you'll want to maybe do a workshop for the superintendent's evaluation tool.
Right, and have you started your administrative evaluations?
I started my self-evaluation, and I sent the tool today to the principals, giving them the date of March 4th. The principals and department heads, I think it was Wednesday, March 4th, to get that back so that you could have that.
Okay,
Okay? Is that timely enough?
that's fine, yes.
Last year was March 6th.
Yep, no,
So-
that's fine,
Okay.
yep. And then we said that you and I would put together, remind me how this goes.
I have to look in other emails, but I think what we do then is we present those to the committee along with the evaluation rubric, and
From
the
the
form,
superintendent,
and then
yeah.
we give them a date where their individual evaluations are due, and then you and I work as a committee to put those results together and create a, I can't remember what it's called right now, but combined results.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, this.
What did you say?
The aggregated,
Yes, the aggregated data.
Yes.
So that we
So
can
will
present
be
it in
looking at
public session.
Probably around April then, right?
I think.
well,
it
no,
has
you
to
need
be
to
before-
report March
It's gotta
3rd
be-
by March 30th, so
Oh, by month.
if you don't do it at the second March meeting, which is the 15th, you would probably set a third meeting in March, which
For the
we've done
29th.
sometimes, to report out on that.
I would actually just recommend that because I think the timing between the 4th and
Yeah.
the 22nd is fairly tight.
So the 29th,
Yeah,
okay.
do you agree, Pauline?
Yeah, let me just
That's-
look at the.
Would be adding a
Mm.
third meeting,
But
but
it's gonna be a very defined.
very
Right.
defined
Yep.
agenda.
Would that be all right with everyone? Okay, so then we'll
And-
put that
and-
on 29th.
Finally, if I may, it's not on the agenda as C under the superintendent's report, but I brought a book that's in front of Dr. Lepre that was put together by Jess Douglas, An Intro to Nursing and Allied Health, Semester 1. And I wanted the school committee to look at this tonight. This is an outstanding representation of her new course. She has in it, of course, all of the, pictures of the field trips and the speakers and all of that. But in addition to that, you will find her professional goal written down and her student goals that she had for all of the students, and her evidence of how she addressed the different elements, the power elements in the educator evaluation, a rubric that she used to score some of her students' work. And you have to go through this. You have to spend 10 minutes because this is, this is special. This is
Yeah.
something that we want to use as an exemplar for other teachers. So I encourage you to take a few minutes at the end of the meeting and go
Yeah,
through it.
That's fabulous. Thank you for bringing that
And thank
for
you,
us.
Jess.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. Is that your report?
That's
then?
my report. Thank you.
Any comments? Yes, Jen.
I would like to thank the administration, the fourth grade teachers and NHA staff who participated in the fourth grade overnight at the Whaling Museum. It was very exciting for my fourth grader, and I really appreciate the time spending a Friday night at the Whaling Museum with your students. I really appreciate that, and it makes me feel so proud to be a part of this community.
How was your night's sleep?
My night was great because I slept at home. I was not a chaperone this trip.
Okay.
But I want to thank you and the fourth grade staff.
Yeah, it's a great event. Thank you, Jen. Tim, any comments? Melissa? No?
Do we have anything?
Spelling bee.
Spelling bee, yes. But Francis, any update from you? No? Would you like to report out on the spelling
go
bee?
ahead.
Because, well, I didn't stay to the end, so I don't know. Can only speak about the food in the beginning.
Yeah, we had another great night. As many people know, it was postponed from the previous Friday. We had fewer teams because of the rescheduled date, and I think NHA, for example, was not there because they were at the Whaling Museum with our fourth graders, and there were a couple of other groups, and lots of changes right before the event. The academics once again reigned. I think this is the fourth time that they have won the event, and I think the word that they won it on was Sisyphean, which the root word being Sisyphus, whose task was to roll the stone up the mountain, and then it would roll down the other side, and he was condemned to that task by the gods in Greek mythology. So, and they won with the spelling of Sisyphean, based on our enunciator and judges.
Who was a little cheeky, I might say, at some points. Were you not? Anyone else? Yes. You were.
There was a running commentary with that Dr. Bucky had about the choices, I believe, that Mrs. Kubish made.
Yes,
in
Mrs.
You haven't heard
Kubish,
about
you
this
didn't
yet?
hear this, did you?
I'm throwing him under the bus then.
Yes. Was it televised? Could you watch this?
No, fortunately it was not. But FOMPS, again, to give them a shout out. In 30 years of their existence, they have raised $2 million to support public
That's amazing.
schools
That's-
on
yeah,
Nantucket, and
That's great.
that just boggles my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So kudos to all of the FOMPS
Yeah.
people who
Logan
made that
wants to say
possible.
something.
I just think we should also mention how well the calculating Latin assistants did against the academics. So
They did very well. They came in second, thank you.
Jed Williams.
Yep.
And
Chris
arguably,
Cothran.
Could have been another word, in my opinion. They could have gone for another word to level out the score there. But they gave them the academics a run right at the end.
Yes, they did a great job.
Great.
It was fun.
Great event. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. so
Thanks.
much. I love the, Are You Smarter Than Me? Fifth grade.
Fifth grader.
Lana Brissette was so funny on
She
that
was
stage.
cracking me up. She was talking to me there, and I'm thinking, I'm supposed to be talking.